I was supposed to speak on Gita's triune steps and three kinds of knowledge through the lens of Sri Aurobindo. But now I think it will be extremely difficult for me to cover both the subjects. So now I have decided to speak only on Gita's triune steps. Gita's triune steps, because it will not be possible to cover both the aspects within 30 minutes. So first, let me speak that the modern mind interprets Gita. Modern mind interprets Gita as wholly a gospel of works and subordinating its element of knowledge and devotion. So this is the position of the modern mind. Modern mind interprets Gita as wholly a gospel of works, subordinating its element of knowledge and devotion. So why I am trying to speak on the triune part, and the difference between the triune, the very meaning of the word triune is consisting of three in one. It's not three steps actually, it's a triune part, and the very meaning of the word triune is consisting of three in one. Actually, it is not three steps. Actually, it is triune part. Triune part. So this is the first introductory comment. Then let me speak on another two aspects of the Gita. Says, according to Sri Aurobindo, he says, Gita can only be understood. Gita can only be understood like any other great works of the kind by studying it in its entirety and as a developing argument. You cannot pick one slope and thereby and through one slope you cannot interpret the whole Gita. So the entire 700 slokas has to be taken into consideration because Gita is a developing argument. And then there is a revealing statement made by Sri Aurobindo that, but the point here is that the modern mind has exiled from its practical motive power. What modern mind has exiled from its practical motive power? To important things, according to Sri Aurobindo. And what are those two important things? First one is God or the eternal. Modern mind has exiled from their practical motive power. First thing is God or the eternal. And the second one is spirituality or the God state. But according to Sri Aurobindo, these are the master conceptions of the Gita. If you want to understand Gita, you have to take into consideration these two aspects. If you eliminate these two aspects, then there is no point in studying or understanding Gita. God or the eternal, number one, and the second one is spirituality or the God state. So these two preliminary introductory comments, I am quoting from the writings of Sri Aurobindo. Then let me move on to the subject of today's subject. Sri Aurobindo says, the arguments of the Gita eventually resolves itself into three great steps. Ultimately resolves into three great steps. Before I speak on these great three steps, if you want to understand the first step, you are to take into few aspects into consideration. The first, the argument of the Gita resolving into three great steps. Number one. Number second, actions, thereby actions rising into the divine plan out of the human. So we work on human plan. Gita, through these three steps, our actions are rising into the divine plan out of the human, leaving the bondage of the lower plan, that is to say human plan, leaving the bondage of the lower plan into the liberty of the higher law. So this is the goal. First is leaving the bondage of the lower into the liberty of the higher. So the argument of the Gita resolves itself into the three great steps by which action rises out of the human into the divine plan. So this is the agenda of the Gita, hidden agenda of the Gita, so that our works can be risen from the lower into the divine plan. And what is the process? By leaving the bondage of the lower, for the liberty of the higher plan. For the liberty of the higher plan. So the first step, you are to take into consideration six things into consideration. First, the renunciation of desire. But the desire for what? Renunciation of desire for the fruits of action. I have not said, Gita has spoken this thing. Number two, a perfect equality. Pain and pleasure, both you have to accept as equal thing. Gain and loss, pain and pleasure. So this is the second aspect, equality, a perfect equality. And third aspect, work has to be done as a sacrifice. Work has to be done as a sacrifice. But sacrifice to whom? Sacrifice to society, sacrifice to humanity, sacrifice to family, sacrifice to whom? Third aspect, work has to be done as a sacrifice. But sacrifice to whom? Sacrifice to the supreme deity and the self. That is to say, the Purushottam. And you have to do work at this stage as a doer. You are the doer of the action. Nobody else. You are the doer of the action. So these few things that the renunciation of desire of roots of action, then a perfect equality, works have to be done as a sacrifice, but sacrifice to the supreme deity, that is to say, to the Purushottam, and action as performed by man himself as doer. So the first, by the renunciation of desire and a perfect equality, works have to be done as a sacrifice by man as the doer. So you are acting, you are performing the works as a doer with a perfect equality and with the renunciation of desire for the fruits of action. Karumanya vadhi karaste ma phaleshu kadasta. But a sacrifice to a deity who is the supreme and only self, though by him not yet realized in his own being. But I have not realized that supreme being at this stage. But still, I have to perform works as a sacrifice to the supreme deity. But at this stage, I have not realized who is Purushottam. Yet, I am performing the works as a sacrifice to him only. But I have not yet realized him. So this is the first step. So renunciation of desire of roots of action, a perfect equality, doing work as a sacrifice to the Purushottam, but without realizing him, and you are performing the work as a doer. As stated by Sri Aurobindo in his Magnum Opus on his commentary on Gita, that is to say on the essays on the Gita. Then the second step. Not only desire of the fruits of the action, you are to renounce another thing. at this stage, second stage, because Gita is a developing argument. Gita is a developing argument. Secondly, not only the desire of the fruit, but the claim to be doer. At this stage, you are not the doer of your works. Then who is the doer? Then who is the doer? Then who is the doer? So secondly, not only the desire of the fruit, doership too has to be renounced. You are not the doer of your action. Number 3, realization of the self. Realization of the self. At this stage, realization takes place. Realization of whom? Realization of the self. But realization of self as what? Realization of self as equal. The inactive is not, it is not active. Self is not active. Akshara Brahma. So, a realization of the self as the equal, the inactive, the immutable principle. Then who is acting? If the self is immutable principle, if the self is inactive, but it is equal. So realization of all works as simply the operation of the universal force. That is to say the Prakriti. So universal force means the nature soul, that is to say Prakriti. So you are not doing the works. Your Prakriti is doing the works. So this is the most important thing in the second state. You are not doing the work. Your Prakriti is doing works through you. And there is a slope, a beautiful slope in chapter number 11. In chapter number 11, verse number 33, where Krishna emphatically says that Uttishta tamuttishta, Uttishta tamuttishta, Uttishta tamuttishta, Yasula Vaishya Zitta Satrun, Bhumsa Rajya Samriddham, Moevate Nihatah Purvameva, Moevate Nihatah Purvameva, Nimitta Matra Bhopasappasasin. Therefore, do thou arise, get the glory, having conquered the enemies, enjoy thou an opulent kingdom. By me, Krishna says, by me, verily are all these already slain. Vishnu has already been slain. Do thou become the occasion only. Nimitta matra bhavasatvasasin. You are only the occasion. You are only the occasion. So, in the second stage, this will not come. In the second stage, who is doing the work? It is the Prakriti. And what is Prakriti? Prakriti is the universal force. And you have to realize the self as equal, inactive, immutable principle. So now let me quote Sri Aurobindo that secondly, not only the desire of the fruit, but the claim to be doer of works have to be renounced in the realization of the self as the equal, the inactive, the immutable principle, and of all works as simply the operation of universal force of the nature soul, Prakriti, the unequal, active, mutable power. So self is the immutable principle, Prakriti is the mutable power, self is the equal principle, Prakriti is the unequal principle, while self is the inactive principle, Prakriti is the active principle. So this is the second step. Then the last step. Lastly, the Supreme Self has to be seen as the Supreme Purusha. So at the first stage, you are performing the work as a sacrifice, but sacrifice to the Supreme Deity without realizing Him. At the third stage, you are to realize Him as the Supreme Purusha. As the Supreme Purusha. governing this Prakriti. Even Prakriti is not the doer. Because Krishna says in the verse number 33, chapter number 11, Moeivate nihata purvamevo. I have killed them already. Moeivate nihata purvamevo. Nimitta matra bhavasattvasasi. So, lastly, the Supreme Self has to be seen as the Supreme Purusha. Now you have to realize the Supreme Self. At the first stage, though you are performing work as sacrifice to the Supreme Deity, but without realizing Him. Without realizing Him. At the third stage, you are to realize Him as the Supreme Purusha. And what is the function of this Purusha? The governing the Prakriti. Even Prakriti is not the doer. Who is behind this Prakriti? The Purushottam is behind the Prakriti. Purushottam is behind the Prakriti, of whom the soul in nature is a partial manifestation, by whom all works are directed in a perfect transcendence through nature. So nature is only the executing force. Nature is only the executing force. So these 4-5 things to be noted. The Supreme Self as the Supreme Purusha, you have to realize at this stage, third stage. Prakriti is governed by the Supreme Purusha. The soul in nature is its partial manifestation. So we are partial manifestation of the Purushottam. In Gita it is said, Mama eva angsha sanatana. My portion eternal. Who is Jivatma? Who are we? We are Mama eva angsha sanatana. That is to say, my portion eternal. My portion only. My portion eternal. Right now we are portion eternal. We have to become Narayan one day. Madbhavam agata. So first we are right now Nara. One day we have to become Naruttam. But finally we have to become Narayan. Madbhavam agata. So the first point to be noted, the Supreme Self as the Supreme Purusha. Then the Prakriti is governed by this Supreme Purusha. The soul in nature, that is to you are. Who are you? A partial manifestation of the Purushottam. Mama eva angsha sanatana. All works are directed by the Supreme. All works are directed by the Supreme. Through whom? Through His executing force. That is to say, Prakriti. And in us, Prakriti means mind, life and body. Man, pran, sari. And directed but in a perfect transcendence. So these are the 3 steps. Then Maharishi explains that to Him love and adoration and the sacrifice of work have to be offered. But at the very first stage, we are offering, we are performing our work and sacrificing to Him only, but without any realization of the Purushottam. But at the third stage, we are realizing Him as the Supreme Purusha, that is to say, as the Purushottam. So to Him, only to Him, love and adoration and the sacrifice of work have to be offered. Nobody else. The whole being has to be surrendered to Him. Whole being has to be surrendered to Him. Whole being. And whole consciousness raised up to dwell in this divine consciousness. So that the human soul may share in His divine transcendence of nature and of His works and act in a perfect spiritual liberty. So the 4-5 things to be noted, that love, adoration and sacrifice of works have to be offered to this Supreme Purusha only. But what is the difference between first stage and this third stage? At this first stage, we are offering, we are performing works as sacrifice to the Supreme Purusha, but without the realization. But third stage, we have to realize Him as the Supreme Purusha, as the Purushottam. And love and adoration and sacrifice of work have to be offered to the Supreme Purusha. The whole being has to be surrendered to him. Whole being. Manmana bhava mat bhaktu madhyaji mang namaskuru. Manmana bhava mat bhaktu madhyaji mang namaskuru. And the whole consciousness has to be raised up. Whole consciousness has to be raised up to dwell in this divine consciousness, so that the human soul may share in his divine transcendence of nature and of his work and act in a perfect spiritual liberty. These are the 3 steps. But then Maharishi explained, the first step is actually the step of Karma Yoga. The first step was the step of Karma Yoga. First step is the step of Karma Yoga, the selfless sacrifice of works. Karma Yoga means, what is the difference between ordinary works and the Karma Yoga? In ordinary works, we do not sacrifice our works to the Supreme Deity. But in case of, if it is to be Karma Yoga, then we have to offer our works, or we are to perform our works as sacrifice only, and sacrifice to the Supreme Deity. So this is the difference between ordinary works and the Karma Yoga. So the first step is Karma Yoga, the selfless sacrifice of works, and here the Gita's insistence is on action. In this very first step, Gita's insistence is on action. But still, Gita is not a whole, the Gita is not a wholly gospel of works only. You have to take into consideration the Gyan Yoga and the Bhakti Yoga also. So, the Karma Yoga, the first step, Karma Yoga means selfless sacrifice of work. To whom? To the Supreme Deity, but without realization of Him. And in this stage, Gita's insistence is on action only. Action only. The second is Gyan Yoga. Why it is Gyan Yoga? Because you have now known who is behind your work, that you are not the doer. Who is doer? Who is the doer? Your Prakriti is the doer. And you have realized the self as the immutable principle, equal principle, and the inactive principle. Then who is the active principle? It is the Prakriti, it is the executing force, mutable principle. So this is the Gyan Yoga. This is the Gyan Yoga. The second is the Gyan Yoga, the self-realization and knowledge of the true nature. Because now you have realized yourself as what? As the immutable principle, equal principle, and inactive principle. You have realized. So self-knowledge has come. So the self-realization and knowledge of the true nature of the self and the world. And here the insistence is on knowledge in the second stage. But the sacrifice of work continues, because it is triune parts, not a separate part. So the first step is still continuing. So works continue, sacrifice of works continues, and the path of works becomes one with the path of knowledge. So it now becomes a double path of works and knowledge. Double paths of works and knowledge. So few things to be noted, that Gyan Yoga is the second step. And why it is Gyan Yoga? Because at this stage there is the self-realization and knowledge of the true nature of the self and the world. Then insistence is on knowledge at this stage, but sacrifice of work still continues. Path of works becoming one with knowledge. Path of knowledge becoming one with knowledge, still not disappearing into it. So path of works is not disappearing into the path of knowledge. The path of work still continues and become part of the path of knowledge. That is to say, it becomes a double way, double path. The last step is the Bhakti Yoga. Last step is the Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga, the last step is Bhakti Yoga. And what is Bhakti Yoga? adoration and seeking of the Supreme Self as the Divine Being. Manmana bhava madbhaktu maddaji man namaskuru. Adoration and seeking of the Supreme Self as the Divine Being. And here the insistence is on devotion. Insistence is on devotion. But the knowledge is not subordinated. Knowledge is not subordinated in this very last stage. Only raised, vitalized. Vitalized means made energetic, made creative. Vitalized. Made creative, made energetic, and fulfilled. Still the sacrifice of works continues, even at the start stage. So that the double path becomes the triune way. Now the double path means double parts of original double parts of works and knowledge becomes the triune way of knowledge, works and devotion. So that is why it is called triune path, not the three steps actually. Triune path, consisting of three in one. Consisting of three in one. And the first and the fruit of the sacrifice. But there is one fruit still left. And what is that fruit? And the fruit of the sacrifice, the one fruit still placed before the seeker. You are not to renounce that fruit. And what is that fruit? Is attained. And what is that fruit? The union with the Divine Being. Union with the Divine Being and oneness with the Supreme Divine Nature. Supreme Divine Nature. So these are the three steps. These are the three steps. How and that is why it is said that Gita is a book of synthesis. Synthesis of what? Synthesis of words, knowledge, and the devotion. And these three steps become triune way of works, knowledge, and devotion. These are the three great steps. And just let me mention only I was supposed to talk on the three knowledges of the Gita. And what are those knowledges? I will simply mention only. It's a very beautiful, from lower to higher. From lower to higher. In the very chapter number 9, in the very first sloka, Gita speaks of Gujjatamam Jnanam. And Gujjatamam, what is the meaning of the Gujjatamam in English? Secrets of all secrets. It's a gradation from lower to higher. Three types of knowledge. First one is secrets of all secrets. But what is this secrets of all secrets? Gita says this is the essential knowledge with comprehensive knowledge. And it is there in chapter 9. It is there in chapter 9. Gujjatamam Jnanam. And Gujjatamam means secret of all secrets. Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam. Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam. That is to say, essential knowledge with comprehensive knowledge. Jnanam Vijnanam Sahitam. Then, of course, Gita, again, Gita in chapter number 10, Gita has spoken about Paramang Vasha. Gita speaks about Vasha in slok number 1, verse number 1, chapter number 3, chapter number 10. What is this Paramang Vasha? So Paramang Vasha means the supreme word. Supreme word. But what is the meaning of the supreme word? Again, O Mahabahu, hearken to my supreme word, which I will speak to thee. The light-hearted from my will for thou soul's good. So this is separate, not part of the three knowledges. So first one is Gujjatamam Jnanam. Then the second knowledge it is there in verse number 61 to 63. Verse number 61 to 63, chapter number 18, last chapter. Then Gita speaks of Gujjat Gujjataram. Gujjat Gujjataram. First one was the Gujjatamam Gyanam. Gujjatamam Gyanam means Gyanam Vijnana Sahitam. Gyanam Vijnanam Sahitam means essential knowledge with comprehensive knowledge. Now Gita says, this is my Gujjat Gujjataram Gyanam. And what is this Gujjat Gujjataram? Gujjat Gujjataram Gyanam. Gujjat Gujjataram Gyanam. More secret than the secret. First one was secrets of all secrets. Gujjataram Gyanam. Now Sri Krishna says Gujjat Gujjataram. That is to say, more secret than the secret. More secret than the secret. And in the verse number 64, he again speaks of another knowledge. According to him, it is the Sarva Gujjatamam Gyanam. Sarva Gujjatamam Gyanam. And Sarva Gujjatamam Gyanam means the most secret of all. Most secret of all. So Gujjatamam, Gujjat Gujjataram, and the Sarva Gujjatamam. Sarva Gujjatamam from 64 to 66. 64 to 66 of the chapter number 18. And Gujjat Gujjataram from 61 to 63, and the Gujjatamam Gyan is referred to in verse number 1, chapter number 9. So these are the three knowledges Gita has spoken about. But I am not going to deliberate on them because I have already spent my time. So this is what I have to speak. Thank you and namaskar to all.